Hello everyone, my name is Joe Mallon. I'm going to be the sort of human moderator today for Android Developer Office Hours. So welcome. I'll give you a reminder that if you sign in, please +1 us so that we can keep track of how many people are actually showing up. Let's start with our first question that we have in the moderator that's been voted to the top. Google designed Dart to be easy to write development tools for, well suited to modern app development, and capable of high performance implementations. Will you support Dart on Android, or should we focus on native development?
All right.
This is Trevor?
Yeah, so yeah. Hi everyone, my name is Trevor, and to answer this question, the answer is, well, we actually can't tell you because we can't tell you what our plans are for future products. But what I can say is, generally speaking, it is a good idea to go and focus on native development. All of our frameworks are written in the Java programming language. So we generally recommend that people go and use that. It gets you the most options, as far as what you can do. It's the easiest way to go. Gets you the best performance. So generally speaking, you should stick with that. If you do need more performance, we do have the NDK available. But generally speaking, yeah, you go ahead and stick to the Java programming language when you can, and that's our recommendation.
Okay. Let's move on to the next question. There is a useful action bar compatibility implementation in samples. Does it support the view controller? How should I add support for that in? Or what are the exact limitations or power of the pre-Honeycomb action bar?
Well, yeah,
Alex?
My name's Alex. To answer this question, that action bar compatibility implementation is meant as basically a very basic sample to show you how you would implement an action bar in earlier versions of the platform. It doesn't support inserting your own custom views in. In order to pull that off, you could either try extending that implementation with your own code, or you could try a third-party action bar implementation. We're all actually pretty big fans of one called Action Bar Sherlock. That's definitely worth a look.
Okay. What's next here? The Android design site, developer.android.com, design building blocks index.html, which I hope everyone is familiar with, especially offers a lot of insight as to how to build a consistent UI. Would it be not possible to also give a code example for each building block?
I could probably answer that. So I guess.
This is Roman.
Oh
here.
yes, yeah. So my name is Roman. I mean, there's definitely a good point of feedback, and I think that at some point, we can do that. Having said that, right now the two sites, Android Design and developer.android.com, they're not really very closely tied together, but there's definitely something we're investigating. How do we better kind of link up the two sites? Nothing really to announce right now, but that is good feedback. So.
Okay, and to expand on that a little bit too, it's probably worth noting that the Android design site is designed for the UI designers who are creating the layout blocks for your app and figuring out how everything should work on paper. Generally speaking, you don't want to be thinking too closely about the code. Sure, keep it in the back of your head, but you really don't want to be thinking about just how should my app work. And that's really what that site was designed for. It's targeting UI designers who are not always programmers. It probably is good to have some links over to the design site or to the rest of the dev site, and we definitely are looking into future options as far as what we can do there. But the primary audience for the design site is UI designers. So that sort of hopefully helps explain the rationale of why it was originally written the way it was.
Thank you.
Okay. We have a question in chat.
Okay. Let's see. This is posted in moderator. Since I'm here, are there any best practices for handling multiple textures in render script? Currently, I use structures to hold a mesh and relevant material data. Is there a better way?
I can take both those.
Robert.
Robert, by the way. So for the texture question, so each mesh that you draw, actually, you can actually draw with index passed into RSG draw mesh. So you can tell it which triangle you want to draw. So that's how you draw one triangle at a time. Before you actually draw the triangle, you want to bind the texture to your fragment shader that you want to use, and then draw the triangle, and then bind the next texture, and then draw the triangle.
Okay, so that'll let me treat each face as a different material, like OBJ files allow.
Yeah,
Okay.
and you got to keep in mind that you can only have 8 textures attached to your shader. So if you have more than that, you have to figure out how to, switch them in and out.
Right, and which function, I can index RSG draw mesh by itself?
It's a function with 4 parameters. You actually give the starting index and then how many triangles you want to draw from that index.
Okay.
If that makes any sense. Okay.
Yeah.
And for the next question, you're doing it right, so good job.
Okay, thanks. Because
Yeah.
I couldn't think of any other way, to get that data there. So I have an array of all the texture bitmaps and then an integer that points to which index to use.
Yeah, that sounds fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Do we want to take the next chat question?
Oh, it looks like it's still being typed out.
Yeah, so
No.
Oh, we got it.
Oh, here we go. I have a question about async task loaders. If the data is loaded from an RSS feed and changes once in 24 hours, does it make sense to switch from async task to async task loader?
So, I'll take this. So generally speaking, my advice when you're getting data from RSS feeds is actually to do neither. Usually what I recommend in that case is to use a background service that periodically wakes up and fetches the RSS data and caches it to disk. The problem is with async task. So for those who don't know, async task is designed to go and fetch data asynchronously when you want to load it into a view. The problem with that, though, is then whenever you want to go and show that data, you still have to wait for your RSS feed to load. So that's going to introduce lag into your app. You're also assuming that the network is even available, which it might not be. I say this all the time. Even though it is a cell phone, it has a data connection. It's essentially an always-on connection, but you don't know if the user's in an area with poor network coverage. You don't know if they're in an airplane or in a train, or the network might not actually be there. So whenever possible, whenever you're relying on some sort of external data source, we really strongly recommend that you go and fetch that data in the background separately from when the app's running, and then cache that locally so that it's always available when the user wants it. Now, to go back to the questions to async task versus async task loader. So it's for Wikipedia, so you have to keeping the data locally. Okay. So in that case, generally speaking, I'd have to see your app a little closer, but I think async task loader is probably a good idea, just because we recommend using loaders whenever you have an external data source that you want to go and link up to a view. That's currently our best practice. So I think that actually probably is the right way to go there. It's certainly not the only way to do it. Loaders are not required. It just frees you from having to do a lot of tedious work that's required otherwise. If you do have the code there already, there might not be much benefit other than ease of maintenance, but that's certainly a good thing anyway. So, does anybody else have any thoughts on that? Nope.
Great, thank you. We'll go back to the moderator list. Excuse me?
Right.
Oh, sorry.
Sterling.
Go ahead, Sterling. Did you have a question, Sterling?
Yeah, I posted something on the moderator list. Are you hearing me, by the way? My mic was having trouble.
Yeah.
Good. Basically, I feel that there's a growing problem to do with permissions and how permissions are perceived by users, and the overall approach of if you don't like the permissions, don't install the app. But the the obvious dilemma for the developer is to add functionality, you have to add permissions quite frequently. And it's basically, I think the current permission system could do with some improvement. I think it was a good place to start, but it needs revisiting.
Do you have any specific suggestions that you'd like to point out?
There have been a couple that have come through the bug tracker, things like giving users control over which permissions are actually granted to an app to be able to deny permissions on a one-by-one basis. Mm-hmm. The way that some of the permissions are grouped right now, there was a comment on the moderator about the phone state permission. It's often very useful to know whether the phone is on a call or not. But in order to do that, you have to get the phone state permission, and that looks really scary to users. They think you're reading their phone list and listening in on their phone calls and all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
So
and phone state does give you a lot of, actually does give you a lot of permission, so that's understandable too.
Sure, I understand that, but you know, that's what I mean about regrouping. That it would make more sense, perhaps, to uncouple some of the more widely used but less scary permissions.
Yep, and yeah, I think there's actually been some conversations about that internally as well. Again, regarding phone state. And I think in that case it was because the one I heard most recently is developers who want access to the IMEI, but don't want access to
right.
To everything else, or vice versa, right? They want to be able to tell if they're on a call, but don't want to know about the IMEI, or So yeah, very similar to the example you gave. So I mean, it's something we're constantly looking at. It's always a little challenging because we have to do it in a way that maintains backwards compatibility.
Sure.
There are a few different techniques we can use to go and modify the permissions with each API level release. But at the same time, we have to go and maintain this going backwards as well too. If you specify an older API level, we have to have various mapping rules that determine what rules get grandfathered in, and it takes a bit of planning to do it. We do periodically revisit the permissions and change things around, as happened before, and I'm sure there'll certainly be more changes in the future. I can't speak as to whether or not what changes are actually being made, but it is something we do know and take a look at. Now, more broadly speaking, about you were asking whether or not it's possible to go and re-implement their permission system, so say that users can selectively allow or deny permissions.
Yeah, that's one that seems to come up quite frequently from both the user and developer side.
Yeah, and we've definitely heard that. I know there's an open feature request for it. I don't know whether or not they're planning to implement that or some other change to permissions. Honestly, again, I can't speak to what the future plans are going to be, but we have heard the user feedback there, and it is something that we're aware of. From a technical perspective, again, we run into problems with backwards compatibility. So any change to permissions model is one that has to be done very, very carefully, and that's why you're not going to see instant changes on any of these things, right? But we are considering it. We're always taking this feedback and looking to see if it makes sense, if there's a better way to do it. So we do hear you. So and it does come up in conversation. So.
Okay, it's good to know that it's on your radar, basically.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Great. Thank you, Sterling.
Yep.
Did we have any questions from live chat? Some things scrolled off the list here, so I can't really tell. There's the transition to Task Loader is unclear. There's no examples of using it with a web service, and your webcam is blurry out of focus, I think.
Having watched a different hangout that we hosted from this room last week, I'm not sure it's actually the webcam being out of focus as much as it is bandwidth constraints.
Yeah.
It'll actually adjust the resolution based on your bandwidth. So.
Okay. Does anybody?
Yeah. So our apologies for the video quality.
Right.
But there's not much you can do about it at the moment.
Right. So comments about working with Async Task Loader and web service. Does anybody have anything they can say real quick offhand?
Well, I mean, I think what Trevor said is really important, right? If you're dealing with a web service where generally you can have pretty high latencies, you really don't want to use an async task or an async task loader. I mean, you want to do something in a service. So it's really if you're doing something like that, then don't use either. But in terms of the transition from async task to async task loader, I'm not really sure if there's much that I can go into personally. But yeah, I mean, I think we should have sample code for task loaders in the Java docs. If not in the Java docs, then it's probably in API demos. That's where I'd look as well.
Yeah.
Somebody wrote in saying, do we have any OpenGL experts in the Hangout? Do you have a specific question?
Yes, I do, actually. Yeah, I do.
Shoot. Up.
You seem to have been muted. Sorry about that.
We can't hear you.
We can't hear you, Mark.
Click on the microphone button and it should unmute you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah.
All right. I'm using a proprietary OpenGL rendering engine, and it's version 1.1, and it's working pretty well using some code from the frame buffer activity example that you guys put out. The problem that I'm running into is that there are devices out there that don't support a stencil buffer on their own, like the Samsung 8.9 4G from AT&T, for example. They only support a packed buffer. That extension is not available in the Kronos package, but it is available in the Android OpenGL static library. But every time I try to use that one, I get an unsupported operation exception. So is there an example on how one can use a frame buffer using the Android OpenGL library? Because I have Googled for days and I can't find anybody using it.
Anybody have an answer?
I missed the beginning of that question.
Do we have the handheld mic, by the way, for Dan? Yeah, so Dan here, if you can see him on the second camera, is our resident OpenGL expert.
Yeah, I've used OpenGL.
Yeah.
All right. So I missed the question, but basically, what's the issue?
So the issue is, I guess the root of the problem is I'm unable to use the Android OpenGL GLES11 EXT library. Every time I try to generate a frame buffer with that, I get an unsupported operation exception. It works fine using the Kronos package. So I know the hardware can do it, but the Android static library tells me no, it can't. So.
Huh.
And so this was for specific devices, right? This is not for all devices?
Well, the application is written for tablets in particular, and all the tablets that we've tested on, the Zoom, the Samsung 10.1, the Samsung 8.9 Wi-Fi, they all work fine using the code that we had. The problem is that we ran into a device that does not support a stencil buffer on its own. It only supports a packed buffer, where the first 24-bit is a depth buffer and the other 8-bit are the stencil.
Mm-hmm.
That particular extension is not available in the Kronos package. It is, however, available in the Android OpenGL package, but again, every time I try to use it, it won't create a frame buffer for me. It just gives me an error.
The issue is when you try to use that extension, or you try to use the one that's built into the Android OpenGL package at all.
So I can't use that particular extension with the Kronos package because it's not exposed.
Right, right.
So what I did was I got it to work using the standard, or more standard, I guess, GL Stencil 8 extension, and that works fine using the Kronos package. The minute I try to switch that over to use the Android OpenGL package, it breaks. Not changing what extensions I'm asking for. I'm still only asking for the Stencil 8 extension, and I get an error bag that's an unsupported operation exception when I try to generate the frame buffer.
Yeah, I'd have to look.
I found other people when I Googled, I found other people that had the same complaint on a Nexus device.
I have to take a look at the code. I'm not familiar with that enough to be able to tell you anything useful. But it's something that we should definitely try to triage and figure out what's going on. So I'm not sure what the best way for us to get a snippet to look at to try to see exactly what you're doing. But
Stack Overflow.
Yeah, but probably posting a question to Stack Overflow is the best thing to do, and we'll try to pick it up from there. And then I guess you can send a link to the question through the moderator.
Yeah, I'll leave a link to the question as a comment in moderator. And that'll be the easiest way for us to find it.
Okay, I'll do that.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Whoops. We have another chat question that rolled off the top here. So let's scroll back. Elizabeth has another question about app widgets. Okay. The new collection type app widgets have a provider. The new collection type app widgets have a provider that can set a pending intent template. I tried using a different class, of my app, and I found I could only set the widget provider class as the intent class for the pending intent template. This is the logic of the examples. When I tried to use another class for my app to use getActivity instead of getBroadcast, the action on the list fails. Did I miss something?
So basically, a pending intent with an activity is failing, but a pending activity with a broadcast is working just fine?
Yeah, it's actually only working if I use the class that's setting the provider. So the provider class sets the pending intent. If I try to put in a different broadcast receiver or a different class and use getActivity, it wasn't working for me, so I thought maybe I was missing something.
There's something recently that I saw, like an internal discussion around permissions for pending intents. I don't know the details. I don't remember the details, but we have to look at that.
So I might have to export that class.
Potentially. I mean, I don't remember the details, but that's something to look into.
You have an example, correct?
So I'm following the example code where you create a broadcast receiver locally in the provider class, and then you execute that broadcast receiver. And so from the broadcast receiver, I can open my activity. But I thought it would be cleaner and better if I could just put the activity directly into the pending intent template, which I cannot seem to do.
And if you have a simple like button or something instead of a list view or something, if you have a separate button and that has a pending intent that fires an activity, that works just fine?
Well, right, because you're not setting a pending intent template on it. It's not following the pending intent template. You know, this is specific to the new collection app screen widgets.
Right. Yeah, I mean, unless anybody else has a comment, I think we'll have to look into it deeper offline. So, like we said with the previous question, probably a Stack Overflow post and a link to that in the moderator comments would be very helpful, or in the Google Plus announcement, a comment to that.
Okay, I'll put it up there.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Okay, let's go back now to the moderator list, the original moderator list. We have another question here. The expanded notifications now appear in the order they are posted. This is also true for ongoing notifications, which used to appear at the top of the list. Is this by designers or a way to put them back on top of all other notifications?
Well, yeah, I'll answer
Trevor.
this. And the answer is it's by design. There's not a way to reorder them, so that was an intentional change. So really not much more I think we can say there.
Okay. Right. Next question. How do I prevent the notification bar from displaying on a full-screen app that launches a full-screen intent? It appears briefly while launching the intent before sliding away again. It looks bad.
So by full-screen intent, I'm assuming it means full-screen app launches an intent that initializes another full-screen app. I don't know that there's a way around this. It seems like you still have to go, I mean, you have to leave the first app in order to enter the second app. I agree that it doesn't look good, but I don't think at this time that there's really a way around that.
Yeah, it's also probably worth noting, we have some comments in our style guide that talk about full-screen apps and hiding parts of the system UI. And the general guidance is try to avoid doing it. There are times when it makes sense when you're playing a movie, possibly for full-screen games, but I'd say for 90% of the use cases, your app is actually not so important that you want to prevent the user from seeing incoming text messages. It is their phone after all, and they want to see when things are happening. So, I don't know the details of this app. Maybe it does make sense in this case. But when I hear that you're going from one full-screen view to another, it makes me think maybe one of those shouldn't be a full-screen activity. So take a very hard look at your design and make sure what you're doing makes sense. Again, without knowing more, we can't actually say one way or the other. But
I do want to also add that one thing to potentially look at is you can add a flag to your window called layout in screen. And what that basically says is that the notification, the status bar, should be overlaid, and it shouldn't kind of affect the layout of your screen. So if the ugly part of this is kind of like your layout, like jumping when there's full screen and when it's no longer full screen, then one thing you may want to do is add that flag, and that should prevent kind of a relayout. Another thing to look at is I'm not sure if this will have any effect, but you can potentially look at changing the window transitions. If there is like a 0 transition, maybe it'll be better, but I don't know for sure. But yeah, what Trevor said, for sure.
Thanks, Roman. Do we want to go to the next one on the moderator? The question is, will the Android SDK have a better support of pinch to zoom pan actions? Also, how would you transform this code at this particular link to pan an image view even when it's zoomed out?
Okay, so first part of that, we can't say. Again, anytime you're asking any speculative questions about the Android SDK or products, our answer is always, I'm sorry, we can't tell you because we're still working on stuff. So as for the second part, how to transfer your code to add an image view when it's zoomed out, my advice there is to take a look at some of the existing samples within the Android framework that implement to zoom, for example, the Gallery app or the web browser, for example. Take a look and see how they're doing it. Unfortunately, this isn't the best format for us to go and critique your actual code. So we can't actually really pull that up and sit there and tear it apart in the amount of time we have and give you a good answer there. Alternatively, you could try asking that question on Stack Overflow and post a link to it in the comments, and maybe somebody will be able to give some additional advice there. But unfortunately, on the spot here, I can't tell you what the correct way to go and fix your code is.
Okay, next question. Google I/O 2011 announced support for uploading apps up to 4 gigabytes. That never came. We have an approximately 150 megabyte app launch in April. What are our options? And then there's a link to Stack Overflow.
That's my question.
Okay.
All right.
Yes?
Without going into too much detail about what the plans are for market, as far as your current options are for large file downloads, the current approach taken by pretty much all apps which are larger than the current APK file size limit is to go and have an asset server. When your app launches for the first time, you bring up a dialog that says, hey, we need some additional files. We're going to go ahead and download those. It'll take a few minutes. Do you want to continue? And then display a progress bar. And then just go and fetch whatever resources you need from your server and save it to an SD card. And if you really want to go and do this the proper way, you actually go and do that as a background service and display or use Download Manager and display a progress bar in the user's status bar. So that way you can go ahead and do other stuff. But that's minor details. The gist of it is, again, just on first launch, go and download your assets from your server and save them locally.
Yeah. One thing that I would add to that is, going with this path, it is really important to pay attention to sort of the user experience and pay attention to things like encourage your user to download over Wi-Fi instead of over their cell network, especially with 150 meg download. Check for things like when they drop internet connection, make sure that you're resuming and not just starting the 150 meg thing all over again. Make sure when they exit the app that the download doesn't stop. Like all the stuff that bugs you when you download a game that implements this stuff, make sure not to do that to your users.
And also, if you're looking for places to store stuff, just an obligatory plug for one of our other products. We do have Google Storage for Developer, which allows you to go and store large files and offload them to our CD. which can then go and make sure that you're not serving this from your own personal web server, depending on what resources you have available to you. That may or may not make sense. So that is an option as well. All right. Any other questions you want to ask us while you're there?
While I'm here, in the render script, one of the blog posts mentioned that it had model loading support, and I was wondering if there's any good examples of how to load models and how to create the models.
There are none, sorry. I just speak to the development team and ask them for some.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Thank you, gents. Okay, thank you, Trevor and Alex. Where do we want to go to next? Okay. Google Apps have a send feedback function, which looks very similar to the crash report function. Can developers use this as well? And if not, what's the best way to get feedback from users?
That's a very good question, yeah. Do you want to answer?
Sure, I'll take this one. Currently, that feedback functionality is not a public API. The best way to get feedback from your users currently, it would be basically to set up like your own little feedback form in an about screen or something like that, and just send a single post request to your own server, and just have some server-side code that that dumps all the information like build and feedback and 1 to 5 stars or whatever information you want to pull from your users, crash logs, whatever, into your own database server-side. It's worth pointing out that there's also a lot of information that you can get right now. Like through PubSite, you can get things like crash logs, and you can see.
PubSite is the market publisher.
Oh, sorry. Like through the market publisher site, you can see crash logs of like things that your users have experienced. You can see like general ratings and lots of comments and stuff like that. And you also, if you feel like digging into it, we have an analytics SDK that you can use to break down how your users are actually using the application and do things like split up the data and say like, okay, how are people who only use ice cream sandwich, like what features are they using, or people who have this set of phones, what are they using? The one thing about the Google Analytics approach that I would point out is that it does involve because you're gathering data, it involves according to the EULA, you have to put a disclaimer and a little like terms of service thing when the user first launches the app, and they have to agree to the fact that you're going to be tracking this data. But that's like one screen with an OK button. So it shouldn't, and as long as you're properly anonymizing the data, and you're not gathering Jane Smith from Santa Barbara, California experiences this or anything like that, then you'll be fine. Anything else?
I think that covers most of it.
Thank you, Alex. We have a question in chat. Do we want to go to that, or do we want to go to the moderator?
Sure.
Let's go to the chat one.
Yeah.
Okay. The chat one that I noticed here says that Galaxy Nexus Maguro does not adhere to the CDD, and there haven't been any updates to fix this. If Nexus devices don't obey the APIs, how can developers expect any device to?
All right, so I'm curious what those particular bugs you've linked to actually say.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I can't click on them right now because we're sitting on the couch.
We're not in a position where we can open up the browser and read through. So if you could just
give us some
throw
detail
a summary.
About what those bugs are talking about. Yeah, give us a quick summary. But generally speaking, so there's actually two parts to Android compatibility for devices. There's the CDD, which is the Android compatibility definition, which is a very long document that goes into excruciating technical difficulty about what devices should and shouldn't do in order to be considered an Android, an Android device, basically. And then there's the compatibility test suite, which is the code that actually goes through and checks all these things and makes sure that the device actually matches what the CDD says. Unfortunately, the compatibility definition is a bit longer than the test suite. So we actually don't programmatically check for everything yet. There is a fair amount of manual testing that is involved. Unfortunately, some things do slip through because of that. We're constantly expanding the compatibility test suite to go and cover all those additional cases in the CDD that we aren't testing for yet. So we're continuously improving there. So hopefully, whatever these particular issues you're mentioning, will get added to the test suite, and that'll cause it to get automatically flagged going forward. And even aside from that, if you do notice somewhere where you're seeing behavior that doesn't match up with what the TDD says, let us know. We'll go and talk to the device manufacturers. If it's us, we definitely want to know. That shouldn't happen. But again, just like any software, there is a certain degree of manual process involved there. And occasionally things do slip through, and we'll hopefully address that in the future, a future firmware update for the phone. I really wish I knew the particular issues you're talking about there, and then we can go into some more detail. But generally speaking, our goal is to go and try and get 100% compliance with CDD, and it's a moving target, so we're constantly evolving our tests to go and try and meet that. Does anybody else want to give some more information on that, or anything I'm missing?
Nope.
Cool.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks for the question, Scott. Next question is from the moderator. Currently, we don't get the scrollable tabs building block and the swiping between tabs pattern, both recommended in the Android design guidelines, from the standard platform API. Any plans to include a standard implementation in the platform?
I guess I can answer that. So the scrolling tabs building block, that actually, it's not currently in the platform. But an implementation of this is available in the support package. The support package, as you guys probably know, is the thing that kind of gives you fragments for free before Android 3.0, and it also gives you this awesome thing called View Pager. So scrollable tabs, and take the word or the naming scrollable tabs with a grain of salt, because they're not really kind of like tabs. I mean, from an end user standpoint, they kind of feel like tabs, but they're not exactly tabs. But scrollable tabs can be implemented using something called a pager title strip, which you simply attach to your view pager. But the second part of the question of swiping between tabs, you can actually implement this. Basically, if you're using action bar tabs and a view pager, which, well, actually, if you're using action bar tab and you want to allow swiping between those, you simply need to put your fragments into the view pager. And then, as you swipe, you set up a listener on your view pager that modifies which action bar tab is selected. And then when you touch the different tabs, you basically set the current item on the view pager. So you don't use the fragment transaction that's given to you in the action bar tab callbacks. You simply do your own thing. So it's not like, a super easy plug-and-play implementation, but it should be fairly trivial code-wise. You shouldn't need more than like 20, 30 lines of code for it. Let me see if there's anything. Yeah, I think that's. Are there any plans to include a standard implementation? I mean, as Trevor and folks have been mentioning, we can't really talk about plans in the future, but one thing in general we do want to do is make it easier to implement standard patterns. So, whether that be framework features or additions to the support package or whatever, our goal is to make it easier to implement that. But we can't really discuss in which way that will manifest in the future.
Okay. Another question from moderator. Will Android be seeing L2CAP and other Bluetooth protocols exposed in the SDK in the near future? It seems that implementing new profiles is difficult without adding them to source. The new profile support is a great step, but it could be expanded.
So our answer to that is the same as the answer to any other question that is asking for speculative information. And the answer is, we can't tell you. That said, open source. If you really want to see something, please send us a patch. There are also, there's also the Android contributors mailing list. If you don't know how to submit a patch, you can ask on there, as well as take a look on source.android.com, which has pretty thorough directions. So yes, if there's something you see and it's not getting added to the framework fast enough, you are always welcome to add it yourself. And we do accept patches. So yes, next question.
Okay, before I take the next question, I want to remind people that if they've joined us, that they should +1 us. We want to keep track of how many people come into the Hangout at any particular time. So.
Okay. Actually, the next question was asked live by the person who asked.
Can we start a question about a minute? Yeah. So we talked about that already, and we'll continue to pursue that. Next one after that is this Google I/O talk is about best practices on how to handle app doing remote calls, but I haven't been able to find any real-life example. Do you have any links to sources when these have been applied?
So this is specifically Virgil Dobzhansky's RESTful clients on Android talk, and I think we've covered this in previous Hangouts, but it's probably worth mentioning. We don't currently have a single piece of source code that illustrates all of this, but I mean it is something we want to expand on in our training sessions and our sample code in the future. So right now there's no single place that I think that we can point you to that shows you how to do this all in a nice clean package, but yeah, look for more, I guess, in that space in the future. If you guys want to tack on to that.
No, I think that's a pretty good.
That's pretty much some of it, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Roman. Is there anybody online that wants to ask a question that has been waiting to ask it? In general, if you want to ask something, you should type into the chat box and we'll get around to you. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question and moderator.
Yes, or if you don't have a keyboard, just wave wildly.
Or wave, yeah.
See you all do.
Gaetan in France has posted a question, how do I use third-party shared libraries .so files in a native activity project? That's
more of a process than a simple answer, but we do have documentation on this. It's not visible on our website, but if you download the NDK and unzip it, there's a little documentation.html file that you pop open, and somewhere in the top-level nav is a section called pre-builts, and that has the entire process outlined out for you.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Alex. So, can you style action bar tabs when stacked, like they are on the ICS phone, independently of tabs that are pulled into the action bar when in landscape mode or on a tablet?
I'm really understanding
so the question basically, I mean, when you use action bar tabs and you use them on a Galaxy Nexus, in portrait mode they're kind of stacked as a separate bar right below the primary action bar, and when you rotate into landscape, those two bars kind of collapse into a single horizontal row. So the question is whether or not you can style them individually, and I don't have an immediate answer. My guess is no. I mean, I've looked through all of the action bar styles, and I'll talk about that in a second. That's the important part of the answer. But I don't think that there is a way to do it currently. But like I said, you can actually look at all the source code. Specifically, the pieces to look at are under. Well, actually, when you download the SDK, you basically get this kind of platforms directory. In the platforms directory, there's things like Android 14, Android 15, Android 13. So go into one of those, go into the data folder, look at all the framework resources. Those are in the res folder, under the data folder. And then under the resources, look in values and then styles.xml or values themes.xml. Styles.xml and themes.xml is where you can look to see pretty much everything possible. Everything that's possibly stylable. So definitely take a look there just to see if there's anything resembling that, but my guess is that there isn't at this time.
Thank you, Roman. Where are we going next? Got it. Is there a plan to allow developers to implement true full-screen features into their non-video player apps? I like how it works with video players, which tap to reveal soft keys. Not a fan of the lights out mode that is available now.
So, I'm not entirely sure what this question's getting at because, as the poster has mentioned, you can already go. There is the lights out mode, which is where it takes all of the buttons in the system bar and reduces them to tiny dots. But you can also go and turn on a true full screen mode, where that whole system bar disappears entirely. As soon as you touch anywhere on the screen, it comes back. And so there is an API call that allows any app to go and use that. It's not restricted to video apps. So if you want to use it, just go ahead and use it. So I'm not quite sure what the question here is.
Well, I think the question is like, can I just permanently hide the navigation bar? And I think the answer is you really can't, because otherwise there'd be no way to get back into, like press home, for example, or press back. I mean, the user really cannot afford to get lost in an app with no way out.
Right. You don't want to not have a home button. That'd be very bad.
Yeah. So I think the answer to this is, potentially in the future there'll be some, clever ways in which we can do something like that. But I mean, right now, really, the only two navigation types that are supported are, like Trevor said, the low profile and the kind of the full screen. That's not always full screen. Touch brings that back up.
Right. So when you are in that mode, for those who aren't familiar with it, just basically it will always eat your first touch event and cause that to surface the home button. And there actually are some tricks you can use to go and actually detect when that touch event occurs and respond. So like I know there's actually a way to go and like have it surface up your play pause controls, but still that first touch will always take you out of full screen mode.
Yeah, and the specific API is view.setSystemUI visibility listener or something along those lines, where basically, like Trevor said, I mean, if you do have information that you want to hide, you can basically say when that navigation bar comes back up, then show that information and vice versa. So you can tie like action bars visibility to your navigation to the system UI and things like that.
Okay, what is the best way to implement a broadcast receiver that needs to run its startup run indefinitely, waiting for intents to trigger it, and must be able to accept intents that need to be registered for explicitly? Comments?
That's quite a multi-part question.
I mean, first off, but by register for intents that need to be, or able to accept intents that need to be registered for explicitly, I'm assuming that means intents that are not mentioned in your manifest.
I think it means only.
Is that what he's asking?
In some, I guess he means like some mechanism so that only certain intents, or that only certain source applications can sort of intent into your application. Right. Mm-hmm. Is what I'm gathering from that.
Yeah, 'cause my understanding with broadcast receivers is you don't actually have to have them running. You set up an intent filter in your manifest. The system will go and monitor for those intents for you, and when one of them occurs, then your intent or your broadcast receiver will get invoked.
Right. So your broadcast receiver isn't actually running; it's just sitting there waiting for the system to activate it.
Right. So the whole run as startup point is actually moot. You don't actually want to do that. The system will start your broadcast receiver when the intent is fired, and not before. So, along with the second part of the question, having it run indefinitely, again, don't do that. It'll waste battery power, and there's no need to. The system will start your receiver for you. And then accept intents to be registered for explicitly.
I would say, let's see. It's difficult to say without having more context in the specific application, but having some sort of, I mean, the only thing I can really think of is having some sort of like access code or key that gets sent to the broadcast receiver as an extra from the intent. Then the broadcast receiver would check that against some sort of whitelist and behave appropriately. That's the only thing I can think of, but we are kind of flying blind here because we don't really know anything about the application in question.
There's also, I mean, you can also implement permissions, right? I think this is the way cloud-to-device messaging works. So if you implement cloud-to-device messaging, you set up a broadcast that can't be triggered by pretty much everybody. It can be only triggered by certain parties, I think, like just the system or who not. So that may be another place to look at how C2DM is implemented.
Right. Generally speaking, yeah, you declare that your intent requires your permission to send it, and then you can go and say that permission can only be obtained by apps with a certain signature. So that's the security model there. So that is certainly an option. All right. Let's go on to the next question.
Right. So next question is also from moderator, not my question, but I had the same question as this link on Stack Overflow. How do I, using intents, have two markers placed on a map in Google Maps?
The answer, unfortunately, is that you cannot do that. When you're using intent, you can only place one marker. If you want to place more than one marker, then you'll have to use a map view and actually place those manually. So.
Okay, thanks, Trevor. When will the source code be released for ICS 4.0.4, and are we looking at delays in this area from now on?
It'll be released when it's ready, at the moment it's ready to be released. and not a second
I'm not
beforehand.
as close to. Are there phones out there with 4.0.4 yet?
I don't think so. No.
Yeah, I don't know how much we can comment on this. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not something we can comment on.
Our time machine hasn't been working very well for several months now, so it's impossible for us to go into the future and comment on exactly what has happened. And since we can't give you an exact comment on things that happen in the future, we tend not to give answers for them. You have to understand that. So, is there any way to display custom layouts with compound buttons, QCB, or Java layouts in status bar notifications? How to use custom views, including quick contact badge or compound button?
Compound button. What is a compound button?
I'm not sure what a compound button is.
I'm not really clear on that either.
Yeah.
QCB. Quick contact badge. Okay.
Yeah.
Quick contact badge. So I mean, so a notification is basically a remote view, and a quick contact and a remote view. Basically, there are like a certain views that are whitelisted to such that they can work in a remote view. Things like button, things like image view, things like text view are okay. Things like quick contact badge, I'm guessing, just simply are not.
No,
but,
I'm pretty sure it isn't, because a quick contact badge is going to go and add a pop-up window on top. And I'm pretty sure that's really not something you want happening while you have your status bar down. That would be really confusing.
Yeah.
Plus, quick contact badges are by nature more interactive, and a notification should really be either tap it or you swipe it away.
Yeah.
And so even if it was possible, it would be a bad user experience to do that.
One thing I do want to mention is that there are really a lot of things you can implement with simple buttons and image views and text views. Like, I mean, almost everything inherits from text view. Like, I mean, button inherits from text view. If you look at a quick contact badge, it actually inherits from image view. So there may be another way to achieve what you're trying to do without having the same exact view in place. But again, like these guys said, definitely make sure you're not doing anything funky like showing dialogues and whatnot.
And again, just as a reminder, whenever you're working with either widgets or notifications, it is a remote view, and you are limited in what you can do with remote views. So just keep that in mind. You can't display everything. So.
Well, moderator, once again, this week I found an issue where I could not affect an image view's visibility after using a view animation with fill after and fill enabled set to true. Using clear animation before set visibility gives me the correct behavior. Is this by design? Is it a bug, or is it just me?
It's an excellent question.
I would have to look at the code. I can't say from here. If you want to go ahead and post a snippet to Stack Overflow and link to that Stack Overflow post as a comment to this moderator question, we can go and look at it afterwards, and we might be able to give you more detail.
In general, if you've got further questions, or if we can't answer your question or something like that, you should post something to Stack Overflow if you haven't already.
Yep.
That'll help. So.
Yeah, I'll also add that we do go through all these questions about a day in advance and try and research any complicated issues that we might not know off the top of our head. If you submit questions less than 24 hours before the show, we might not have had a chance to research your question beforehand, and especially for very complicated issues or things where we have to go and check the source, check our bug tracker, possibly speak with engineers who implemented them, anything like that. Get the question earlier so we have a chance to go and gather more data for you. So, in this case, again, I'd recommend posting it to Stack Overflow, and then we can research further from there.
Thank you. We have a question that came up in chat. It's a simple I'm sorry, maybe this is a follow-up. No. It's a simple rotate, and at a later point I call set visibility to hide the view, but that was my question. But I'm not sure. Was that from Stephen? Oh, I see.
Yeah,
okay.
This is the
It's a simple rotate, and at a later point I call set visibility. This is the one about QCB or Java layouts and status bar notifications.
No, this is the one we're on. The one's highlighted right now. I mean,
okay.
Honestly, it sort of does sound a little bit like you might have run into a bug. don't think anybody here is familiar enough with the inner workings of the animation framework to say that that's definitely the case. But the behavior you're describing does sound a little odd, and so my gut instinct is that you probably have run into a bug. I'd want to confirm that, make sure, but again, just my gut feeling is that you've probably run into a bug here. Yeah, totally.
Okay. Great. Android has no threaded group MMS messaging feature, which is very frustrating for users in group convos with iOS, WP, and BB. Will you add this feature anytime soon? Do you have a suggestion on how to implement? And there's a link to Stack Overflow.
All right. So first question. Again, if you ask us any questions about our future plans for the platform, we cannot tell you. So our answer to that, once again, is we cannot tell you. As to how to implement it, I don't think anybody here is familiar enough with how the group MMS spec is written to tell you what's required to do that. That's where I'd start, though. Take a look at what the spec says, and then take a look at what the telephony framework gives you as far as options for receiving and processing MMS messages. And that will tell you whether or not the framework gives you enough support for it or not. I'll also echo my earlier point that if there's something in the framework that you really, really do want to see, and we're not getting to it fast enough, we only have so many people here, and we do accept patches. So you are certainly welcome to submit a patch and add it yourself. And assuming that the code is good, again, check on Android contributors first, make sure that the engineers are happy with it. We certainly love to accept patches for any features that are missing. All right, next question.
Next question is, unit test an Android app. Where should I start from? And guess what? I will be able to answer this. The answer is you should start by looking at the documentation. We have documentation on what's available for unit testing in Android and in the developer guide. And if you've got more questions than that, then post something to Stack Overflow. Okay, next question. In the Supporting Multiple Screens article, it suggests to provide different bitmap drawables for different screen densities. When editing a bitmap for a different density, is it advisable to simply scale it or completely redraw it? Roman?
Yeah, I can talk about that. So the simple answer is, it takes very little time to just scale it, right? So if you have an icon, this is specifically an icon, you can take the icon and make it at a high resolution and then just scale it down in Photoshop or Imageview or GIMP or whatever. It takes very little time and it gives you some result, and I'm sure it's usually kind of like a normal result. In a lot of cases, though, when you scale down, you lose a lot of the clarity in your iconography, in your graphics. So you'll see things kind of like blending together and looking kind of mushy. And in those cases, I mean, if you have the time, then redo it. Basically, I mean, it's really about resources. If you have the time, if you have the design resources, then absolutely do it. And also, if you scale up, the opposite effect occurs, where basically your graphic starts looking really blurry, and that's not very good. So if it's either blurry, when scaling up, then if it's either blurry when scaling up or kind of is losing a lot of the clarity when you're scaling down, then you may want to try to kind of redo the entire icon for that resolution. But I mean, we do acknowledge that not everybody has the time and the resources to do it. So if you have to take a shortcut, if you absolutely have no other option, then that's what you should do. But yeah, and in general, when you're designing graphics, it's best to start at a very high resolution and just think about what the destination sizes will be and kind of plan for that accordingly.
Thank you, Roman. Another question from moderator. There's no copy, cut, paste of entire calendar entries in the stock calendar app. Are there patent or other restrictions keeping this from happening? Is this something Google could add or other developers could contribute?
If there were patent restrictions, I don't think we would really, no, we would not be able to talk about them. As satisfying as it would be to write off any feature requests we hadn't implemented and casually blame it on a competitor, it'd be fun. But is this something Google could add? Possibly. I would like to know a little bit more about the use case there in terms of when you say the entire calendar entry, would you be wanting to like export the calendar, that entry into some sort of more open calendar object, or would you just want the title and like a paragraph snippet, or and where would this be copying and pasting to? I think the more likely situation would be that calendar entry, you would be able to share it and export it to via the like share action provider or something, share it to an email or an MMS or something like that.
And to answer the second part of this question, is it something other developers can contribute? Possibly. Yeah. Check on Android contributor mailing list, ask, and they'll be able to tell you if it's something they're interested in accepting, and whether or not there's some work being done already, either internally or externally. If it's internally, probably we actually can't tell you, but we might tell you you might not want to work on this. But generally speaking, my advice is if you want to know if it's something developers can contribute, just go ahead and ask on the mailing list, and we should hopefully be able to get you a bit more information and some guidance as well, which also increases the probability that your patch will actually get accepted when you do submit it.
Okay.
I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah. Okay. From moderator, I have a reference to an AIDL interface A and a parsable object B. B is published through another AIDL C. When client of C is trying to access A, it is coming as null from parcel. How can we pass a reference to an AIDL interface through parcel?
So this question's a little odd to me because, like you said, you're trying to pass something from one process to another. And what you're trying to pass is a reference to an RPC interface, which is managed by your current context. So once you pass it to that other process, that reference is not going to be valid anymore. So the short version is you can't. Your other process will have to go and open up that interface separately and then use it to go and create this connection that way. I wouldn't try and parse it through. Try and parcel it up and pass it anywhere else. That just sounds like a recipe for disaster. So, all right.
Okay. Thank you, Trevor. Thank you, everyone. Same time next week. Yes. Same bat time, same bat station.
Yep. And just as one last reminder, if you haven't done so already, please click on the +1 button beneath this video if you're watching live. We don't get analytics, so we have no clue how many people are watching unless you click that button. Right. So please let us know you're watching so we can keep doing these in the future. It's important.
Thank you, Trevor.
All right.
Thanks, all.